Clover. How you guys doing? Good. Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm Corey. Like you mentioned, a little bit about me. I'm from Lexington, Kentucky, so go Wildcats. I don't know if anybody's a Wildcats fan, but that's me. I just moved to South Carolina, along with, that's where Bert and Kathy's daughter is. Thank you guys also for being so kind. All of you were very gracious and kind and thoughtful, especially Bert and Jimmy and Kathy. I just got engaged. This is my new beautiful fiance. Give him a little wave. There you go. All right. And just so you know my values, I love Jesus, I love his church, his bride, and I love the gospel. And I feel called to preach. I feel called to preach because of those things. And I believe that they're the most important things that anybody could know. I believe that the sermon today that God's given me, I feel like it's from God, has the ability to change and impact each and every one of our lives and hearts today. So let's get into it. So how many of you guys have ever started out something that started out real fun and exciting, and then it got really, really, really hard? Maybe it was like a workout plan, or a diet, or a budget, or a relationship. Maybe it's like education or like a class. That happens to me all the time. Well, I had a friend who had an experience like this at a pretty substantial level. His name was Dan, and Dan was a fun, talkative guy who was not much into exercise. That was not his thing. But he had a friend come to him once, and he sat him down, and he passionately envisioned him, excited him, motivated him, and he said, "We're going to go run this half marathon. It's going to be awesome. We're going to get the little shirt sign. We're going to get a sticker. We're going to put it on the back of the car. We're going to get to wear the special stuff. It's going to be really fun. We'll hang out. We'll go eat after. It'll be a great moment." And Dan, without thinking much, got real excited. And not only did he get excited, but he went online, subscribed to the little sign-up sheet, and bought his ticket. Paid $50 to actually sign up for this marathon. The other problem you might not know is this was Thursday night, and the half marathon was on Saturday morning. Let's just say Dan was not a runner. When he played football, he played lineman because he didn't want to run. He was not a runner at all. So Dan gets all hyped up. On Friday, they're like, "Let's go practice." He's like, "No, I'll be good. I'll just run on Saturday." Doesn't run one practice. So, he gets there on Saturday. He's all excited. He's getting all warmed up. He's stretching all out. He's getting all excited. He's having fun. And he starts the race out, and he's feeling good. You know how it is when you start running. You're feeling good. You're kind of like feeling the fresh air. You're taking deep breaths. And he said about a mile in, I have a feeling it was a lot less than a mile, he said he started to feel things that he'd never felt before. He said he started to feel pain he'd never felt in places before. He said he had thoughts that he'd never thought before. And I know this is silly, because why would he do that? Why would he not prepare himself for the journey? Like, that's going to be pretty tough. But I think that in a serious manner, in our life, we can feel this way with God. I feel like a lot of times we can start, whether it's our faith journey, or sometimes it's, I followed God with tithing here, or I followed God with listening about this relationship, or this child, or this situation I feel like I trusted God in. And whether sometimes we're not willing to admit it or not, but life can get really tough. Sometimes it can be following God and we're like, why in the world is it so hard? I think sometimes we can just ask God, like, why is it so hard right now? Like, why does it feel like the harder that I follow after Jesus, the harder that I follow God, sometimes life gets harder and harder. The trials get more and more, and they get heavier and heavier. And I think this question is not a new question. In fact, the good news is this question has existed for years and years, actually thousands of years. Since the Bible, this has been a question for many, many people. And I believe the answer is found in the Bible. I believe it's found in a story in Matthew. Just to set the little tone for it, Jesus has just preached and performed miracles to 5,000 men. Now, first off, you gotta understand it's men. They think it was like 20,000 people, like maybe more than that. And he has just turned 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish into food to feed all of them, so 20,000 people probably, and 12 leftover baskets that are like the size of a double hamper was what they would have thought. It was a lot of food. Nobody was doubting it. And they were all getting really, really, really excited, kind of like us when we get real excited. And he sent them all home. He said, all right, go home, because they were going to make him king. It was going to be this big ordeal. And not only that, all his disciples were excited. And then he does something unexpected. He says, disciples, go get on the boat, go across the Sea of Galilee, I'll meet you on the other side. I'm going to go pray. And they kind of looked at him like, are you sure? Now, I think a lot of times we can give the disciples a little bit of grief. 6 chapters earlier, which would have been probably about the fall, this is the spring now. In the fall, they were all on a boat and they thought they were going to die, straight up. They thought they were going to die. They thought the boat was overturning, they were going to die. And Jesus was in the boat with them. He was actually sleeping there in the boat. Now, you can imagine, this is the next step. God's saying, okay, now this time you're going without me. You got to trust me from afar. This is kind of dangerous. And they're kind of nervous and not excited, but they go. And so, we will pick up the story. We're in Matthew 14, 23. You can follow along with me, or you can just listen to me preach it and read it. So it says, after he had dismissed them, he went up on a mountainside by himself to pray. Later that night, he was there alone. And the boat was already a considerable distance from land, buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. Shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them, walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. It's a ghost, they said, and cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, take courage, it is I. Don't be afraid. Lord, if it's you, Peter replied, tell me to come to you on the water. Come, he said. Then Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water, and came toward Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid. And beginning to sink, cried out, Lord, save me. Immediately, Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. You of little faith, he said, why did you doubt? And when they climbed into the boat, the wind died down. Then those who were in the boat worshipped him, saying, truly, you are the Son of God. So there's like 10 sermons in this passage. There's tons. This is a pretty weighty passage. And what we're going to focus on is the second half. But to understand the second half, you've got to get a glimpse of what Peter's doing. The Sea of Galilee is in a bowl. It's surrounded by kind of mountains, and it's kind of like in this deep bowl. It's actually 700 feet below sea level, pretty far under sea. I think it's actually the lowest lake in the world. And this means that when winds come, the heavier ones are pushed down into the bowl. And it means that, it says in a matter of minutes, it can literally go from entirely no waves, entirely calm, to waves of around or even over 20 feet in air. It just zoomed, and they have no idea. You can literally be out there, and in minutes, you don't know what's going on. You're in a torrential, like almost tsunami-looking thing. And Peter, in the midst of this, steps out of the boat. He has the faith to step out of the boat and follow Jesus. Now, something weird is, Jesus clearly says, you have little faith. So stepping out of the boat's big, and it's hard, but Jesus is saying, that's the little part. The hard faith is the sustaining faith. So, once you look at the end of verse 9, Peter is walking towards Jesus. He's coming towards Jesus on the water. He's the only man in history walking on water. That's pretty cool. I'd like to walk on water. He's literally walking on the water toward Jesus. It's going amazing. It's going well. But then I can imagine maybe a wave crashes, or maybe he kind of gets hit in the face with some like kind of sprinkled like crash of wave. Maybe there's wind that kind of blows him a little bit. Maybe thunder kind of cracks real loud near him, or lightning lands near him. It's a big, big moment, and it kind of scares him. And the idea is that Peter first inadvertently looks away from Jesus. Without thinking, he kind of glances away. But then, Peter focuses on the waves. This is my first point. Peter loses focus on Jesus. What's important to understand and think about this is the winds and the waves and the storms, they didn't change. They didn't just show up. It wasn't like it was calm when he was going toward Jesus and then it cracked. The winds and the waves, the circumstances, the situation that he was in was there all along. But at this moment was when Peter lost his focus on Jesus. This kind of reminds me of a moment. So how many of you guys like football? Would say, I'm a football fan. At least a little bit. Okay, there we go. We got some football fans. Me too. I actually grew up loving football. I played football my whole life. Almost played it in college. Felt God calling me to preach. I loved football. I played quarterback. I was semi-successful at it. That was what I did and what I loved. And I can remember at a young age, when I was training to become a quarterback, I was actually at this camp that was like kind of the Peyton Manning camp. It was like this big camp. And one of the coaches set me down. He said, Corey, the best quarterbacks aren't the best throwers. They're not the most accurate. They're not the most powerful. They're not even the smartest or the best leaders. He said the best quarterbacks are the best focusers. The best quarterbacks are able to avoid all the noise, to not hear, to not think about what happened before, to not think about what his teammates are doing, to not think about the future and what the game means, but simply to focus on each and every play. To keep his mind in the game. He said it's not just physical, it's mental. You have to be able to focus. And then he said a line that I'll never forget. He said, Corey, a quarterback who's lost his focus has lost the game. And I think as Christians it's the same way. I think that when we lose our focus on Jesus, when we take our eyes off Jesus, we become defeated Christians. I just think that's how it is. I think as Christians, we are meant to keep our eyes on Jesus. But the problem with what Peter does here is it's not just that he takes his focus off of Jesus, but it's that Peter refocuses on his surroundings. If you look at verse 30, especially at the beginning, it says, but when he saw the wind, he was afraid. Now, the word saw in the English doesn't really do the Greek word any help. In fact, the Greek word is a literal and metaphorical term. So it's saying that while he literally took his eyes off of Jesus, he metaphorically didn't just see the wind. It says the direct definition is to purposely direct one's mind or mind's eye toward. So he directed his mind purposefully on the wind. It wasn't just that he looked at it and glanced back. No, what happened was he looked and he focused on the wind and the waves. Maybe this is just me, but this is kind of like driving. You know, like you can kind of drive, and if you pass like a cool mountain or a cool scene, you can kind of glance and look back. But if you look and you kind of focus, or maybe it's your phone, we would never text and drive here. But if you were to look at your phone, if you focus on your phone, or you focus on the mountains, or you focus on a city or a landmark that you're passing, and then you look back, for some reason you're in a different lane. You don't really know why. It's kind of because when you're focused on your surroundings, you can't go exactly where you want to go. Because it might be in the peripheral. A lot of us are going to say, oh, I'm good enough. I can drive straight while still looking. You probably can. You just probably can. That's why we're supposed to look straight. We have to keep our eyes on the road. Or maybe that's just me. Maybe that's none of you guys. Maybe you guys are all perfect drivers. But that's me. And what happens when you're driving is similar to what happens in life. It's not that you're not focused. you're not simply not focusing. You're always focused on something. It just might not be Jesus. So the question shouldn't be, are you focusing? Or are you focused? It should be, what are you focusing on? And you might hear this and you go, okay, yeah, well, that's cool. But if I'm focused on something related to God, then I'll still get near God. That's kind of the idea. But I want to say, my point that I think you see right here in the text is that what we focus our eyes on determines what we follow. I genuinely believe that our focus determines what we follow. See, when Peter began to focus on the wind and the waves, he follows his fear and becomes afraid. Now don't get it twisted. He was afraid the whole time. The fear was there. That's what courage and bravery is. Stepping out in face of fear. That's what our military does. It's not that they're not afraid, it's that they're willing to step out in the face of the fear. And what happens was, Peter focuses on his surroundings, and then he becomes afraid. The fear manifests itself in him, and he begins to follow it and believe it, which then leads him to sink. This kind of reminds me of Spanish class growing up. I took Spanish all my years, middle school and high school, all the time. And I went to every class. I listened every time. I took notes. I got good grades. I got A's. I got A's on the tests, on the quizzes, on the homework. I did everything. But guess what? I didn't learn anything. I don't know anything. I literally know hola. That's it. I don't know anything else. And the reason is because my focus was on getting good grades. It was not on learning. Now I told myself, well, if I focus on getting good grades, I'll learn a little bit. I'll learn some. It's like a peripheral focus. It's secondary. First off, that was a total lie to myself. I didn't learn anything. But most importantly, I got what I focused on. I followed it. I did get good grades. I got all A's. You would look at my report card and go, wow, he really knows Spanish. No, I don't. But the thing is, focusing on what we want to focus on, we'll get it. It's like you get what you strive for. And I strove for good grades, and I got it. And I think that's how it works in life. How often do we focus on a paycheck rather than working? Or how often do we focus on our kids' good behavior rather than their heart? I think we do that all the time. Or maybe, this one's big for me, we focus on looking godly rather than being godly. Looking godly is not a bad thing. It's a good thing. But when we focus on it, sometimes we miss the point of it all, which is to be godly. I think it's easy to do. But the good news is there's a fix. And we see it with Peter. Peter has these two responses, it's like 1A and 1B of this one reaction, that I think we depart from all the time in our day-to-day life. First, it says, beginning to sink, he cried out, Lord, save me. Now, cried out here is a really heavy term in biblical language. It would be more the aspect of he's falling at the feet of and worshiping and seeking in like complete destruction of oneself, like I am completely yours. And it would be the idea that he looks and comes completely to God. He lays it all bare before him. And I think that this first spot is where we depart. I think it's so easy, especially in American culture, especially in the South, we can get this idea that I'm going to tighten up my bootstraps, I'm going to pull up my pants, I'm going to get ready, and I'm going to go to work, and I'm going to fix it. And I think it's really easy to do that, whether it's a circumstance that's hard, or a relationship that's hard, or a family life that's exhausting, or work that's consuming. We look at ourselves and we go, okay, I know I'm sinking a little bit, but I'm going to kind of swim myself out of this. I'm going to help myself. And it's not even a pride thing sometimes. Sometimes it's just our natural inclination. And I think what Peter does here when he immediately turns to Jesus is big. Because it leads to the second aspect that we can see directly there. Is he has the humility entirely to cry out to God. Read it. Lord, save me. He doesn't explain himself. He doesn't say, Jesus, I was looking at you, but then I looked away. Or Jesus, I promise I was trying to. Or Jesus, I tried to get myself out of this situation, but now I'm crying out. He simply says, Lord, save me. And it kind of convicts me. Do I have the humility to cry out? When there are times in my life where you kind of look at it and go, okay, well, that's not a big sin. That's not a big part I'm struggling with. Where do we need to cry out to God? Because what's beautiful here is how Jesus responds. A lot of us sometimes get this feeling that the more trials, the more tribulations I go through, the farther God is from me. That's just kind of the normal feeling. I feel like I'm surrounded by hardship, by sin, by Satan. I feel like I'm surrounded by hard things. But what Jesus does is amazing. It says in verse 31, immediately, Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. Immediately. That's powerful to me. Because Jesus was ready. Jesus didn't let him sink for a little bit and then save him, or kind of wait for Peter to prove that he was genuine. Peter was ready to be saved because Jesus was already there. Now maybe you're in a hard circumstance right now, something that you can't really talk about, like something that's pretty tough. You can just say, pray for me. You can't really explain it. And we kind of get this idea that, well, my waves, my wind, my storms, they're hefty, they're big. These can't really be handled. And what Peter does here, and what Jesus makes clear, is that he's the master of the winds and the waves. We just sang it in the hymn. He's the master. We're not the master. Satan's not the master. Jesus is. Jesus is the one who's the master of the winds and the waves. He's the one that has power to change our lives. Maybe you're looking at the winds and you see it's not a 20-foot wave, it feels like a 50-foot wave. It's a tsunami. It's a tidal wave. You don't know what to do. But the thing is, you can trust the one who is the master of that wave, who created it, who gave it its power, who allowed it. It's Jesus. He's the one that has the power to handle those waves and those winds in your life. There's also a little nugget here that's pretty. It's this idea that Peter, well, from the outside, is in the worst shape, is the closest to Jesus. Of all the disciples, he's the one who's closest to the work of God, the power of God, and the loving catch of God. He's the closest. There are a lot of other disciples. There's 11 of them that are all in the boat safe. They're sitting there. They kind of watch him probably like, oh, geez, he's about to sink. But they feel safe. But in reality, Peter's way safer. Not only that, Peter's the one exercising his faith. He's the one growing right now. They're in the boat, stagnant and safe. So I ask you, get out of the boat if you're in the boat safe, but also if you're on the water and you're experiencing trials and you're experiencing tribulations in your faith. We all are in our faith journey. I call you, trust Jesus. Trust that he's got you, that he's there. You're the closest to him you'll ever be. It says, the closer, there's an Old Testament proverb that says, the closer I get to God, the farther I feel, but the safer I am. So the idea is you might feel far, you might feel not cared for, you might feel uncomfortable, but God's there with you. So, I urge you, you got to do one thing, which is find an area in your life where you need to admit and say, God, I'm trying to do this on my own. I'm drowning, I'm sinking, and I'm trying to swim on my own. I'm trying to resurface, I'm trying to make it. I just want to trust you. I know you're sure-handed. I know you will catch me. I know you are there. And then the second part is commit for the future to keeping your eyes on Jesus. Because here's the truth. There will be trials. There will be hard times. You will see, you will feel, you will hear circumstances and situations and hard things that you can't predict right now, that are hard. But what I can tell you is, while I don't know those circumstances, I don't know what will happen, I do know that the master of those circumstances, the one who is more powerful and over and more holy and in control of those circumstances, is with you. He's close to you. He's there to catch you. That is the God we serve. So remember earlier, I told you about Dan, the man who ran and didn't know what he was doing. Dan, after about a mile, he says, was starting to feel so overwhelmed. The circumstances were huge. It was hard. He didn't know what to do. He was feeling things and hurting and feeling and thinking and saying things he never thought he would. Dan succumbed to circumstances. He was running. He called his friend. And while he was running, he just ran nice right off the track and got in a car and left. That's what happened. He quit. He succumbed. And maybe it's the same for you. Maybe you feel like no matter how hard you try, no matter how hard you push it, it's just going to keep getting harder. Life is just going to keep getting more and more tough, and the trials just keep getting more often and more heavy. And it might just be easier to quit. It might be easier to get back in the boat, to get safe. You know, Jesus will still love me if I'm in the boat, which is true. But the growth and the love that you feel and the grace that you feel is found in uncomfortable situations. Stretching ourselves is how we grow, like a muscle. You stretch it out, you got to keep stretching out. It hurts, but that's how it grows and gets stronger. So I encourage you, don't quit. It's tough. The world might not want it. America might not want it. People in your life might not want you. They might not want you to keep loving Jesus. They might assume, yeah, it's okay. He'll still love you anyway. But what I encourage you is, don't quit. Don't fall for it. He wants you to grow. He wants you to follow him. I promise you, if God called you out of the boat, he called you to walk on the water. If God called you for saving faith, I promise you that he promises sustaining faith. He doesn't just plan to birth you when we get born again and then leave you like a baby on the side of the road. That's not what he intends. In fact, he wants you to grow and grow strong, become powerful as a follower of Jesus, trusting in him. He doesn't want you to sit there. He doesn't want you to stay on the boat and then sink when you get out. What he wants is you to get on the boat and then walk with him. And maybe you don't need to just walk towards Jesus. Maybe you need to hold on to him. Peter gets back in the boat with Jesus, but he's holding on to him. So maybe you need to hold on to Jesus as well. So, I promise you, Jesus' right hand, God's strong arm, that's a big, big, big word picture throughout the whole Old Testament. That his right arm is there. He will carry you. He will guide you. He will help you. But what he looks for is the humility to praise and to worship him, even when it might not make sense. Even when it might be hard or it might not be the most fun or the most exciting. God wants to grow you. So call out to him. Cry out. Have the humility to call on the master of the winds and the waves in your life. All right, Jesus, we thank you for today. We thank you for being willing to sustain us. Thank you for not only calling us out of the boat, but calling us to live a righteous life with you, following you, and becoming who you called us to be. Because we believe that being out on the water with you is the best place that we can be. Walking on the water towards you and with you is where you call us to be all along. Thank you for being a God who wants to use us. We know you don't have to. We're definitely not worthy of it. We're not strong, we're weak, but you're strong. So I ask you, help us to walk with you. Help us to be with you. Help us to, even when we sink and when we fall, to call on your name to cry out to you, even when it might be tough, or might be hard, or might not make sense. Help us to call out to you. Help us to keep our eyes on you, even when the storms of life are raging, the wind's howling, the waves are crashing. Help us to keep our eyes on the Master. We love you, and we thank you. In Jesus' name, amen. And if you were here today, and you go, that's powerful, but Corey, I'm still in the boat. I've never actually got out. Maybe you need to come today and for the first time, maybe you've been in church your whole life and you've been focused on being good rather than being God's son or daughter. Maybe that's what you need to focus on. Or maybe you've been struggling real hard and you're sinking and you need somebody to help pray with you. Or maybe you're feeling like you've got to get back in the boat. Like that's what you want to do or need to do and you need prayer. Come up, we'll do a little invitation and you can come up and if you need prayer or if you need something,